Speaking of expert opinion and how people like to rebel against that, I need to talk about someone that I don't have a ton of experience with, but I also didn't expect that I would be doing a video on. First, though, let's go ahead and get into the fan art section. This one is from Blue, said I remember that Suris likes Hexmaniac, so I mushed them with a Vaporeon. So there's a Vaporeon Hexmaniac for me. It's like all of my wildest dreams have come true. The next one is from Pernia. No context given, but I have words, and the words are not good for being on Twitch. So thank you very much, Pernia. I greatly appreciate it. As always, everybody, thank you for your fan art submissions. If you want your fan art to be shown in a future video, the best way to do so is to drop it into the fan art section of the Discord. With that said, let's go ahead and get into today's video. Of course, we are still currently sponsored by HelloFresh, so there will be a link in the description if you want to support the channel. But I want to go ahead and move past that very, very quickly because I didn't realize I would be talking about Ice Cube today, right? Ice Cube is a rapper and an actor who has been around for a while and actually has engaged in some civil rights activism in his time. So this is an interesting conversation for me to have, because in this video, he's going to tell you why you shouldn't vote. Or at least, why you shouldn't vote if you are part of a minority group, specifically.
The process.
Let's go ahead and increase his volume a little bit. And I have some counter-arguments here, but I want to be very, very particular when I give them.
The process. You don't vote just to vote. You vote because you're getting something or your community is getting something. So everybody that's telling you that, man, look at them and say, what are you getting? Because people that just want you to vote and not ask for nothing, people that's in power that want you to vote but don't want you to get anything or not asking for you to get anything economically, they suspect. Straight up.
So, let's go ahead and start out. By saying that I want to agree with his statement. However, there's a problem with this. The statement pretends that there is not another side to the vote, the preventative measure, right? If you have two groups of people, and neither group of people is offering you anything in particular, but one group of people is actively threatening you and the other group isn't, that is also an incredibly valid reason to vote for the party who has, at the very least, a neutral interest in you, as opposed to a directly hostile interest to you. Now, where I'm sitting, I'm a little biased. I am dating a trans woman, so of course, I am going to fight tooth and nail to try to keep away politicians who will be very anti-trans, because anti-trans politicians actively make life harder for the woman I love. Obviously, I've got a lot of friends who are also trans or broadly LGBTQ, and I want to protect them too. So it's going to be very hard to ever convince me to vote for a Republican, because a Republican in the House or the Senate, even if they individually have the exact policies that I want, they will necessarily end up voting on party lines and enacting policies against my interests, right? Constantly. How's it going, Dan? How's it going, Dan? Citra says, I mean, Trump gave me $1,800 and Biden gave me $1,400. I guess vote for Trump. He gave you $400 more in a stimulus package. The argument seems to be that if one side, or in this case, either side, is not giving you something economically, then you should not vote at all. And I disagree with this entirely. I believe voting should be mandatory. I am 100% for mandatory voting and fines for not voting. I believe that a lot of our infrastructure would instantly improve when it comes to politics if everybody was forced to vote. 110%. If you want to withhold your vote, then when you get to the voting booth, by all means, write in that you're withholding a vote. You have that option. But I believe getting up and going to the booth should be a responsibility. The reason that I believe that is because more progressive policies, not necessarily progressive politicians, but historically more progressive policies that benefit minority groups tend to get enacted as more people vote. Nixie Chan, thank you very much for the resubscription. I think that was 30 minutes ago, though. I missed that generally. So, it seems to be a very privileged thing to try to say, unless I get mine, I'm not giving you my vote. But the weird part about it is that I know that he's not speaking to historically privileged people with this. He's speaking to disenfranchised people who, in many cases, arguments have been made, need reparations for what the United States did to them generationally speaking. I know that that's who he's speaking to, but it still feels like a very privileged position to take. But let's go ahead and listen a little further before we criticize further.
Because a lot of people been in place for a long time and we ain't got shit. That shit gonna end. We gonna get what we supposed to get.
So again, he might not necessarily be talking about reparations broadly, but just in general, a better deal for Black America.
Period. And anybody asking you not to ask, I wouldn't listen to them.
So it's okay to ask. That's the thing. That's the reason why, for instance, the non-committed voters were outside the DNC, trying to get Palestinian voices heard by the Democratic Party at large. Now, the Democratic Party chose not to platform any of those speakers. They chose to stay with whatever they had on schedule, and there can be a variety of reasons for that. But again, if somebody is asking you not to ask for any kind of thing in return for your vote, God, I want to agree with you. I want to agree that we should vote for our own interest. But the problem that I run into is that there are interests of my loved ones and my neighbors and other people who I have to keep in mind as well. And while individually, as a white guy who's, cis and hetero enough, it's easy for me to just abstain my vote and not care, because it will never directly affect me. Not in any way that is tangible to me. But it will affect the people I love. But it will affect the people I care about. But it will affect the people who matter to me in my life. So, again, on the one hand, I want to agree so hard that if I was not personally getting anything, then it would be bad to do the vote. It would be bad to give my vote to the political party who's not giving me anything. But at the same time, I look at the other side. And I go, but I don't want to get them in power. And abstaining my vote doesn't actually stop a Republican from getting in power. It doesn't. Voting for the politician against the Republican stops them from getting in power. Jassa says, but your vote is technically more important because you're in a swing state? Technically, but I don't want to get into the minutia of that. We can get into electoral college bullshit at a later date, I guess. But as of right now, the option to not vote is an option that is only taken if you have the privilege to not deal with the consequences of the other side getting in power. I cannot afford that privilege. I cannot afford that. Citra says, do you really believe Georgia's a swing state now? So historically, Georgia's been a swing state. Georgia has had a higher rate of turning red than blue, but it very much historically has been a state considered a swing state. A state that can be won, technically, by either politician. This is because we have two major population centers that are incredibly liberal. We have Atlanta, Georgia, and if you go 4 hours south, we have Savannah, Georgia. Both of these are densely populated cities that account for a good majority of our votes. It's one of the reasons why politicians have tried very hard to redistrict Georgia over and over and over again to try to turn more of Georgia red, to try to get more of Georgia available for conservative vote. That's all done to try to disenfranchise where the majority of Georgians live, which is in those cities. We have a lot of Georgians in rural Georgia, but population centers are called what they are for a reason. Skeletal says, I need to vote. I have to vote. I'm going to vote. Yeah. No, that's a good thing to do. So again, I think it's everybody's civil duty to go vote. Now, who you vote for is up to you, based on who you think is going to give you the better deal, or your loved ones the better deal, or the country the better deal, depending on what you value more. For me, I don't really give a flying hoot about the country, broadly speaking, in an ideological sense. I care about it because it's the place where I live. I care about it because it's the place where my parents live, where everybody I know lives, where everybody I care about for the most part lives. I care about it because it affects the rest of the world in a positive or negative way. But in terms of like raw patriotism, I care about America as much as America cares for me, which doesn't seem to be a whole lot, right? I care about America because I live in a military family, because patriotism runs in the blood of my family. My cousin was a Marine, my grandpa was in the Navy, my dad was in the Air Force. Like, generally speaking, I have a lot of respect for our troops, and I have a lot of respect for patriotism. But again, my view of patriotism is very different from what a lot of people consider it. My view of patriotism is I want to make America a better place. I do not like the America that I'm in, so I want to fight to make it better. Whereas a lot of people's view of patriotism is more of a blind faith in the country idea, which I just cannot avow.
Because that's the process. Every community asks for what they want. And we're going to do the same goddamn thing. Anybody telling you that you gotta vote, that it's your duty, that you have to exercise the right.
Which you do. I agree that you have to exercise the right to vote.
And that people died for you to vote.
That is also true. We have military members who died specifically. I mean, granted, they're all dead now, like ancestors died on the idea that we were going to be a democracy. Now, were we founded specifically to be a democracy? That is a completely different conversation, because a lot of our founding fathers just wanted to keep slaves, which is really fucking bad. But irrespective of that, a lot of our soldiers did die for the idea that we would become a democracy that was separate from the King of England.
For one, people did die, but nobody walked out their house to go die for you to vote.
Except for the military personnel who died years ago so we could be a democracy. Except for them.
Were killed by probably some racists that don't.
I mean, everybody was racist back then, so yeah, they probably were, statistically.
Want to see us get anything. Be skeptical of anybody telling you to vote and not telling you to ask for anything, or to tell you to just vote and not to get anything for your vote. That's not how it works.
So, this came up on my feed, and I found it interesting because there's a lot of rhetoric saying that what he's arguing is that people shouldn't go vote at all, which I don't think is the case. I really don't think that's what's being communicated here. Now, there has been some interesting fights here where people have said, well, of course he doesn't want you to vote. He's in cahoots with Steve Bannon. I truly would never listen to any idiot like you who's in bed with Steve Bannon and you want to vote for Trump. Go ahead, right ahead, you asshole. Ice Cube saying, I'm not in bed with any of those clowns, so go get another booster shot, shut the fuck up. This is where I get even more torn, because if you look at the history of Ice Cube's, he's got a basketball team that's like 3-on-3 basketball. If you look at the history of that, Steve Bannon has been involved in that in one way, shape, or form or another. So there is an argument to be had that he is in bed with Bannon, right? Bannon being one of the people who was in charge of the older Trump campaign and is now in jail. But then arguing that, oh, just go get another booster shot and shut the fuck up. This is an interesting thing that I've researched a little bit. So years and years and years ago, and even now, there is a movement within Black America called the Hotep movement, which is very, very anti-science, very, very anti-experts, very, very anti these things. And I think that a lot of the people in that movement are very, very dumb. But the reason that they are this way is because historically, the United States actually was very bad when it came to health things in regards to its Black Americans. We had shit like the Tuskegee experiments. We did a lot of really bad shit to Black Americans because fewer people historically cared about them. So these movements, these thoughts, these feelings are all coming from a place of historical documentation. They are coming from a place of merit, irrespective of how accurate they are, irrespective of how much I can actually avow them. They are not coming from a necessarily bad place. But this is another example of that, right? Where he ends up being an anti-vaxxer, go get another booster shot, irrespective of all of the data and evidence we have on the shot. I get torn on this too, because on the one hand, I want to say, wow, you're being an anti-vax idiot, look at you. But on the other hand, historically speaking, this is a position that has merit. This is a position that makes sense. A lot of people in Black communities in America do grow up distrusting authority because historically, authority has not been fucking great to them. Not really. It's a giant mixed bag. But the end result here seems to be anti-vaxxing, seems to be communicating to a lot of people, because there are people who look up to Ice Cube. There are a lot of people who look up to anybody who's managed to make it in the rap industry. There are people who look up to them and will operate accordingly based on what those thought leaders say, right? That's how all of human civilization has worked for years. But I wanted to look into a little bit about his historic statements on reparations, because when he's talking about you shouldn't let somebody tell you to vote if they're not going to give you something for it, right? And that's obviously not meaning like they give you a bottle of water for you vote. That's meaning that there's going to be something that actually works out for you in favor of you and people you care about for you voting. I think it ignores the other half of it, which is the preventative aspect of voting, the preventative aspect of trying to keep people who are in positions of power that can harm people very, very poorly, trying to keep them from getting that power. But on the topic of reparations, I did find this interview here from The Guardian, where it was asked of him, with intergenerational wealth being so low amongst Black Americans, do you think there's a legitimate case for reparations? Now, I do have to say that I've done a lot of research on this one too. I remember when the BLM movements were happening and I was doing a lot of research on redlining. One of the reasons that generational wealth does not exist as much in Black America as it does in like white America, for instance, is because historically, the jobs that have had to be done end up falling into the problem of the Boots theory of economics, right? So you end up working a lower paying job because you're in a red line district. It's harder for you to move to a better position to get better jobs because you're in a red lined district. And the district is red lined by banks so that people can't get loans to get out of that district. And the lines were not legally put up on racial bounds, but just happen to be, segregating Black neighborhoods away from white neighborhoods. Weird thing that happened, right? So if your family is unable to save money by buying a house and letting that house be inherited for future generations, having to spend more money on housing over time, generational wealth doesn't get to trickle down to the next generations very easily. And if that continues to happen generation after generation, then each new generation, each new child starts out from ground zero, probably in the same red-lined district with the same opportunities their parents had, that is to say, not enough. So in regards to this, there's been a couple things that have been, proposed. Reparations is a way to get things closer to an equitable position economically for Black Americans. That has been one of the options that has been pushed forward, and there are many arguments for it that I agree with. But in regards to that, Ice Cube says, there's a legitimate case for cut the bullshit, you know? We know it's all about access to capital, and we're being shut out of that access. It's simple. Stop doing that shit and keep your reparations. What good are reparations gonna do if you're still gonna fuck us with the banking system? The system that we're all slaves to. You got 13% of the people in America trying to live off of 0.5%. That's how much money actually flows through our neighborhoods. A 2021 U.S. Federal Reserve study states black households account for 15% of the U.S. population and hold 2.9% of the wealth. So numbers are a bit off, but the sentiment is still there. It says, of course, there's crime because that percentage can't live off of that wealth. So stop trying to play those games, stop playing those games, and we'll solve our own problems, which nobody wants us to do, obviously. I generally agree with that statement. If a lot of the redlining that originally happened that caused banks to not give out loans, to not give out capital to Black Americans, if that had not happened in the past, and if we got better about that, then yeah, there would be more Black-owned businesses that could thrive. But again, like with many things, there's another aspect of the equation that's not being taken into account. Black Americans getting access to capital to start their own businesses is a wonderful thought, but it ignores the super retailers, it ignores the super corporations that have moved into those towns and are taking up all those positions in the first place. It's very hard to open up your own barbershop if a whole bunch of cheap chain barbershops are already in the area. It's very hard to open up your own family grocer if the Walmart is right across the street. The thing with a lot of Ice Cube's rhetoric here is that I agree with half of it. I agree that people should get something for their vote, but it ignores the half of the equation where you prevent harm. I agree that historically experts have not been that great to Black Americans when it comes to things like vaccinations, when it comes to things like medical care. But I can't agree with being anti-vax in 2024. It doesn't make any fucking sense. It doesn't go with what we actually understand about how viruses and immunology works. And again, I can agree with the whole, instead of reparations, stop doing the terrible shit to us that's causing the problems. But without any tangible way to make that actually translate into gains overall, it's a wonderful sentiment and it's not much more. I can only agree halfway, and so if I can only agree halfway, that's not really getting me anywhere. That's not really getting anywhere at all for me. That said, I found this to be an interesting thread, an interesting set of scenarios that are proposed there, and there's another aspect of this too. Apparently there's a lot of accusations that Trump is actually the one who Ice Cube's going to be voting for. I couldn't find specifically that, but I did see a lot of rhetoric from him where he said that people are going to vote on who they personally care about more. This was back when Biden was still running against Trump. He said the vote's going to come down to a very personal thing, specifically. But all the arguments against him that I've been seeing have been saying that he's probably going to be voting for Trump, which I find very, very interesting. Though, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, because from where I'm at, if he actually is voting for Trump, I don't know if Trump's going to be getting him any better deals out there than the Biden and Harris administrations would be. And not just him specifically, but like Black America overall. That wouldn't make any sense to me to vote for the guy who has historically been very anti anybody who's not white. But, you know, I guess we'll go ahead and see. Jessa says, so he's in bed with Bannon, or at least Bannon's God. Again, a lot of the information comes up as very, very mixed here. A lot of the information comes up as very mixed where all this is concerned, which is kind of fucked, honestly. Like, a lot of the stuff that I've been able to see have been people saying stuff like Ice Cube shows up every 4 years to tell Black people not to vote and then disappears back into one of his multi-million-dollar mansions. Fuck him. Like, that's a lot of the sentiment that I have started seeing in general. Right? Or this one, I see Ice Cube is trending, so I guess it's time to dust this off again. When someone is trying to get Black people to go against their own interests in the political arena, always follow the money. He and Cornel West should go on a bus together, or a bus tour together. And this, of course, is the Ice Cube is swept up in bizarre bribery plot with Steve Bannon, Michael Flynn, and the Qatari government. This is the 3-on-3 basketball Steve Bannon stuff that I didn't want to get into the specifics of because I don't find it as important as what I thought I was going to see, but still. So remember, let's see, what else was in here that was important? It's crazy that Ice Cube is 55 and still doesn't know why it's important to vote. Don't listen to MAGA cult morons who get caught up in a bribery scream with Steve Bannon. Vote blue down the ballot and then vote again in 2 years. Democrat paid shills are working overtime about Ice Cube. Nothing Democrats hate more than a black person not voting blue. You're useless to them if not. So on the one hand, I want to agree with that. Any politician or any political group that sees that you're not voting for their guy is going to see you as less than helpful towards their campaign. But at the same time, generally speaking, progressive politicians and policies get implemented more when you actually vote the fuckers in. Just saying. See, it's crazy that let's see here, dude. Ice Cube never told y'all not to vote. He told y'all remedial asses to demand something tangible in exchange for your vote. He told y'all to stop giving your vote for free. How could anybody possibly be mad about that? Y'all are emotional and dangerous. It's pathetic and sad. Again, that's kind of where I had to come down on two sides on the original TikTok post, because it's not necessarily saying not vote, but it's saying vote only if somebody gives you something, which I think has its own dangers because it's ignoring another part of the important part of voting, which is the preventative aspect of harm. But anyway, that's all I was able to get into where this entire thing is concerned. I personally have not been a fan of Ice Cube growing up, just not the kind of music that I listened to when I was a kid all that often. So I don't have much of a foot in the race besides just trying to parse out what political conversation is being had there. So I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I hope I did at least decent enough coverage for this particular topic, even though it's one that I am not super versed in. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button if you haven't already. And as always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Mark Anthony, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that. Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fireshard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one, hopefully.